we've just heard three speakers, and thank you to all three, that were speaking around the questions of change, of what's important. We heard you say, it's not about genres, it's about inclusion and voice, and it's about something different to what we often see in practices in mainstream music education. So my job is first to say we have Fran Hannon from Musical Futures, we have Vanessa Wilson, broadcaster, creative producer of German and Jamaican heritage, a podcast hoster, Foundation EM resident advisor. Just as we heard our first speaker this morning, a list, an assemblage of path possibilities that they've made themselves, a career that's made by future making, not an education that's creating people ready for the future because it's too uncertain. But you're creating your path, your career, your possibilities, and I applaud you. We haven't met yet, but we've got a lot to talk about. And Bridget White from Music Mark, welcome. And you heard from Matt Griffiths of Youth Music. And I've got three questions. I'm going to ask one at a time. The three questions, which I'll ask one at a time and each of you to comment on, and we've only got a short time and we need to break for coffee. They're around policy and practice of your institutions, of your scene, where you hang out, where you do a deep hangout during the week and probably on most weekends. I'm going to ask you about evaluation and what is it that you're doing that you access, as you were rightly saying, voice, the voices of those that we are working for, with, not doing stuff to, but working with and for in partnership. And what are your next steps? I'd like to have time for you to ask this panel questions as well. And online, I'd ask Pete if there's some questions online that need to be included. Their voices are important too. And thanks for staying on online, people. So here's my first question. Which musics, or should I say culturally responsive musics, is that a new way to talk about music? I don't know. But which musics do you prioritise or not in your organisation, your program, your practice? Which musics, and what's your rationale for that? Shall we begin at the end of this lovely row? Go for it, Vanessa.
It's lovely to meet everyone, by the way. Hi. I might be a little bit croaky. I'm recovering from Glastonbury, which was a lot. And I just wanted to ask, is that in relation to genres of music?
Your gig, it's you define musics, if you like. You know, you define it, take it into, it's not for me to say what a genre is and is not. So interpret the question.
So which musics?
Which musics, and maybe you even, as I gave a hint, the idea of is it culturally responsive musics, and that's the determinant, but which you include and which you don't. Which musics do you prioritise? If we were to come into your institution, into your life, into your files, and do an analysis of you know what you're making with sound looks like, and offering to the people that you work with, what would it look like? What does it look like?
I love that question. I think immediately the first thing that came to mind is the importance of purpose. Because when I went into the music industry, I immediately felt like everything was very trivial, very fickle, and it didn't really have the bigger picture connected to what I felt was important, which is why I do a lot of work within music and mental health. And when I started DJing, I kind of felt like, where was the purpose? Why am I DJing? I'm going into clubs, I'm going up and down the country, I'm drinking, I'm partying, I'm meeting loads of people, and it's super fun and cool, and people send me clothes, and Nike sending me my favorite trainers, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And then I'm just like, hold on, like, what is the bigger picture? Because like, what am I doing here? You can get caught up in that process very easily, and that's when I sort of took a step back. I met someone called Fred Conniver, who is the co-founder of Keep Posh, which is a community that supports underground DJs and producers. They do live streams in a similar sense to like Boiler Room, and he spoke very openly about his mental health and said that we should start a platform to basically support well-being in that space, in the underground rave scene, which is very different from where we're here today. It's just a space which is very uncontrolled, and there isn't much support in that in those areas. So when I think about like what musics and like how I select musics, it's always like why am I doing what I'm doing in the music industry? If I'm DJing, why I'm sharing, I'm trying to connect with people, I'm trying to share my love for music with people, I'm trying to like create an atmosphere where people feel like they can belong and they can let go. And I feel like there's I know Fred again always comes up, but he has a quote in his Boiler Room where he's like, this is the moment where everyone can just release. And I thought that was like so nice, because like we often forget why we're even doing it. It's almost an escape for a lot of people. And sometimes I feel like, am I creating a space where people can escape? And like where is the like equity in that? Is that even like ethical? Because people are obviously taking off drugs and drinking, and I'm facilitating that. So I often try and create spaces which are opposite, basically, because I know that people come to the dance floor to get rid, to run away from their problems, but I want to create a space where people come to the dance floor and sit with their problems and actually like confront them, which I think is a very like different from the 90s scene of raving, that a lot of people, that's where, you know, raving even started. So that's kind of like how I interpret the question.
Thank you. And I'm hearing reading. You read, it's situated, it's contextual, so it's plural. Amazing answer. Thank you. Can we move on to Fran?
Hello, thank you, and hello to everybody, and thank you to Pam and Pete for inviting me. So, Musical Futures has been around almost 20 years, and what Matt said earlier chimes very much with Musical Futures, in that music is at the top of young people's agendas. It's when we started 20 years ago, it was certainly what young people were saying was the most important things in their lives, but was one of their least favourite subjects at school. So Musical Futures started 20 years ago with funding from the Paul Hamlin Foundation to look at how they could get teachers to think about ways of engaging young people within the classroom context, because young people were voting with their feet. At the time, lots of young people weren't doing any music in school in a formal way beyond the age of 14, and the pressures of BE back 20 years ago weren't even been brought to bear. So over that time, we spent a lot of time working with teachers to try and get them to think about the way that young people learn, and that was obviously facilitated by the research of Professor Lucy Green, who looked at how pop musicians learned and brought that informal learning context into the more formal context of the music classroom. But that was then, and young people then were telling us that they wanted to play instruments, they wanted to play in bands, they wanted to work with their friends. But over time that has changed, so young people don't necessarily want to play instruments, they want to DJ, they want to MC, they want to mix, they want to be music producers. So we had to sort of like really evaluate how could we remain relevant in the sort of like the space that we occupied, which was sort of like encouraging teachers to think about what they were doing with their young people in the classrooms, if we weren't actually going to sort of like take on board some of the things that we knew that young people were wanting to do as they embrace sort of like lots of different ways of engaging with music. So about 4 years ago we began to do some work with Ableton, and we were looking at how could we encourage teachers to take sort of like music technology practices into the classroom and feel confident about it. A lot of it is to do with teacher confidence. It's not an area of music that they feel particularly confident with. It might not be an area of music that they've sort of like studied and brought to bear within sort of like their music education history. And we deliberately sought teachers who felt underconfident about using music technology. So we put together a programme called Music Tech Champions. And we worked with these teachers to devise a series of resources and use of equipment and technology in the classroom so that we could devise some resources that they could use with students. And since then, at that time, we've produced lots of resources available to teachers to use so they can dip their toe in the water. I always sort of like feel that, you know, what we want to do is to sort of like give them permission to sort of like use it in the classroom without feeling that they, you know, they can take those risks themselves with something that they know has been developed with teachers and by teachers. Often teachers in the classroom feel a little bit wary about doing things which they don't feel have been validated in some kind of way, because that's the space that they work in. They're used to working to an accreditation system, whether that's an exam system or whatever it might be internally in school. And that's been really useful because it's enabled us to sort of like support them with a suite of resources. But also, we're always asking young people themselves what kind of music or what kind of resources do they want us to produce, so that teachers can work with them. So we have a resource request, and we frequently get resource requests from young people. So the kind of music genres that we've looked at recently have been Bhangra, you know, because again that's been very much sort of like underrepresented in sort of like a music education, formal music education context in school. So for us it's all about being, you know, can we support teachers to feel more confidence in the formal music classroom with the kind of work that they're doing with their young people, even though they themselves might not have experienced it? Can they support their young people? And actually sometimes, can they learn from their young people? Because I think music teachers often feel that they need to be, or they are the gatekeepers to knowledge about music education, and that's not necessarily the case. It's always great when I hear that teachers have said, do you know what, I started doing this with my kids, and then suddenly I found out that I got an expert in my class that I didn't know who was really great at remixing, and I wasn't really sure about using a DAW, and you know, somebody's been using it in their bedroom. You know, it's great when you can actually allow students themselves to sort of like take that ownership and sort of like say, that's not how you do it, miss, or so, you know, have you thought about doing it this way, or can you do it that way? So, you know, for us, Musical Futures, its long history has always been about putting students at the front and centre of anything that you do in the classroom. And what we've had to do is sort of like, you know, think about how do we make those changes from what we were 20 years ago to what do we need to do now to sort of like keep relevant and to keep sort of like music for those people who work with young people in a formal context relevant.
Thank you. That was a fantastic cookbook of music in the classroom, moving from sort of professional practice and the inclusiveness and reading crowds to reading young people and reading teachers and reading this issue that Lucy Green was the first to see, which was all about performance and popular music. And now it's really diverse. 25 years later, it's much more than just performance of popular music. Fantastic summary, thank you. Really sort of hearing boundaryless aspects, not in silos anymore, and hearing future making, coming from the bedrooms of kids into the classroom and bringing in experts and that are the children. The teacher becomes the learner becomes the teacher. Fantastic. That's just given a little transition for you, and we look forward to hearing from you, please, Bridget, around your experience of whose music, which musics.
A really good question. Just to explain, Music Mark is the UK Association for Music Education. We support those who work in music education, and we're supporting organisations like Musical Futures, and we work with schools, with teaching services, and with higher education. We're about supporting, connecting, and influencing. And I think what's interesting for me to be is that I'm working with those who are working in music, and it's about where the next influencing. Everyone thinks that the influencing that I'm doing is being on Art for Education or talking to the Arts Council or sitting with the Welsh Government to write their national plan, but it's actually also helping to influence our membership, influence the sector to think differently about music and music education. And one of the things I'm really excited about is the way in which we all work together at a national level. And I spend a lot of my time quoting a report that Youth Music researched and published. And the fact that, and it blew my mind when I was told it, and I'm sure it's wrong now, because at the time it said that the young people who were consulted identified over 300 genres. And I sat in a meeting in Watling Humberside earlier this week, and someone said, "Oh, I've come across another genre, bass line." I went, "Okay, there are 301 now." But there aren't 301, because actually, as Matt has already said, as others they don't see genre. They have a genre fluidity they don't want to necessarily label it. They might want, they don't necessarily want to label it. So our original speaker talking about her experience here, and that for me is important. So what for me is important is helping everybody to think about genre in a fluid way, and to know about reports like Matt's Youth Music's report that listened and spoke of children and people's thoughts. So my challenge is, how do we promote diversity of genre? How do we promote youth voice? How do we ensure that the work that children and young people do outside formal education and informal education in school is celebrated? We talk about a music education hub. I talk about a hub as in the hub of a bicycle. The child is at the centre of that hub, and the spokes coming out of it are many and myriad. And how do we connect them all to turn it into a wheel? And that circle for music is so much more complex than it is for maths. For a child learning maths, there's their teacher, the kid sitting next to them who will give them the wrong answer, and possibly their parents who are more likely to say, "I don't know, I can't remember." But in music, there is their teacher, their instrumental tutor or vocal tutor if they have one, the guy who, or the person, who might deliver a choir or a vocal ensemble or an orchestral or instrumental ensemble. They'll be their mate, their parent, their uncle. They'll be their the Spotify playlist which says, "You like that, you might like this." They'll be the music they hear in the shops they go into or in the lift. Everything, music is there around them the whole time, and how do we connect all of that? The work of Music Futures does that, but we need to keep remembering that we're not the only music educators that children and young people have.
That's a beautiful message. Fantastic. And we're hearing fluidity, plurality. We're hearing the idea of not just culturally responsive decisions and priorities, but socially responsive decision making. And now we move on to Matt. Now, you've just heard three really incredible assemblage of a jigsaw puzzle that's coming together very nicely. And if we were all doing what you're saying and doing, we've got no problems, have we? But we know out there in the is it the real world, the other worlds, it's different. And for young people, just to say young people is to bring them to a generalizable label that is nothing generalizable about it. So Matt, take it away as a coder.
So after those three great contributions, nothing further to add. That report Bridget talked about, Sound of the Next Generation. Sound of the Next Generation, it's on the Youth Music website. We'll give you a lot. The other one I'd refer you to is Blueprint for the Future as well. What young people are saying about, creating their lives in music and a career. That's been really helpful to us, and I think lots of other organisations too. I have to be honest, this question perplexed me because it's like, how much and which kinds of music do you prioritise? And back to what I just said, we don't. So what do we prioritise? Young people. What do we prioritise? Young people facing the barriers. How do we work that out? Well, we divide that across the UK in terms of evidence that tells us about young people in care, disabled children, young people in youth justice settings. So that's the subdivision, young people, and that's what the organisations we support are working with. Through that, you then get this glorious, diverse range of music, but it's not the other way around. So I'll keep banging on about this all the time, if you can see what I mean. So that's why the question perplexed me, because it immediately says, which kind of music do you prioritise? Well, if we're working with young people and we're working with our organisations, that's the wrong place to start, surely. And there's a danger of homogenising and making assumptions. What does happen, and what you see, is all sorts of cool, amazing music, and it's very contemporary, it probably hasn't got a name, and it's really exciting. And that music will get into the industry, and I'm excited about that. Vanessa Maria, what you're doing, smashes that. Glastonbury set, smashed it the weekend, I heard all about it, still got my band on. And do you know what I mean? So I think it's about making sure we're not, and conferences like this, are not reinforcing silos itself, because that question for me reinforces a silo. So think differently, everybody, and nothing more to add.
Fantastic. And that, great questions do disrupt, and that's really, really fantastic that we've got that conclusion, that way, and opening up, really, rather than closing down.
Well, yeah, and sorry to butt in, but we've got like partners who we work with in this room, and amazing. I'm just saying about music and healthcare, Royal Brompton, incredible work, targeted work in a hospital setting with evidence about what works. I would say that's not about you coming in and say, so therefore we're going to do this type of music with them. That's not how they operate. Otherwise we're creating assumptions which is homogenising.
So why can't you tell this to the government? What's the policy?
I am, and we are.
Okay, because this is my next question, if we can go back to the beginning.
Yeah, sure.
At the risk of a linear idea, just the way you've sat on these chairs really is, it's sort of working in terms of how each is relationally moving on. The question of policy making, of if not policy making, policy changing. So how are you working in your practices, and I say that plural because you've got multiple practices, that whether it's from evaluations that you do or people, how are you evaluating and changing your practice, and how might that impact policy?
Everything that I do and how I started my career has been from a DIY perspective. It's always been grassroots and it's always been focused and rooted in community. And that is how we, or when I say we, I'm talking about the scene and like DJs and producers and independent artists, we work together and we work often very independently outside of organizations. I think there's often like a lot of mistrust and miscommunication and just generally a lack of awareness that organizations and support and funds exist. So really people just band together. Friendships are formed through the love of shared music, through location, like a lot of some of the greatest groups and collectives, or like Time the Creator, or Future, and ASAP Mob, ASAP Rocky, and those kind of people, they were formed from being together in a certain space as young people and just having fun. And that community and that organic form of friendship is what can create greatness, really. And I think that's how me and Fred running Donkey Pass, which is the platform which looks at speaking about mental health through music. That is how we create change, through coming together. We have ideas of creating supper classes, supper clubs, cooking schools for young producers, DJs, stuff that brings people outside of traditional club venues and in spaces which facilitate conversation. And I feel like conversation, community, and connection is what can really help change. And it's just understanding, having a common ground, mutual ground for people to connect. So that's the way that I'm doing it.
3 C's. We've got community, connection, and collaboration. And we've got a question, please, Jim.
I'm also from the DIY scene, grassroots, but I've ended up in my company having to face the nightmare of fundraising and all the rest of it, and I find it really inaccessible. So what I'm wondering is, and what I've always wondered, what I'm always battling, if we somehow make it more accessible, is it going to destroy that kind of, we are against that, we are the crew that are not able to do that, so we're generating this fantastic vibe? What do you think about that?
I think that's such a good question, and it's so funny that you say that, because just this weekend in Glastonbury, it was a huge issue with the Key Flush community, and through exactly what you said. So they partnered with a brand, Dr. Martens, Everything's online as well. It's not. I'm not giving you the tea. This is this is all public. So they partnered with a brand called Dr. Martins, and they created a fund for artists to tap into money and resources to support them during their stay at Glastonbury. However, it was exclusively for artists who were at Glastonbury. So people who weren't from who were not playing at festival weren't allowed to access this fund. First, from a first glance, people think it's a good idea because it's like, okay, it's the money for artists. People don't understand that most artists at Glastonbury play for free. People don't have support for accommodation. People don't have support for food, for resources. But I know everyone knows that. However, the community, it received so much backlash. People were commenting things like, you don't care about us, you've sold out, you're corporate now, you created a fund and it's not even accessible for everyone. Like, this is so tone deaf. Like, how could you miss the mark of this? And I think there was this sentiment that now this DIY platform has reached the biggest festival in the UK, that they've sort of completely forgot about what the initial ethos of the brand was, which wasn't the truth of it, but from the outside perspective, that's what it looked like. And I think we had loads of conversations about what happened on that weekend, and it came down to not rushing partnerships, not rushing things, because I'm sure you're aware of fundraising and working with partners, things get signed off very late, and then it's just decisions have to be made, and you're probably thinking, okay, it's better to have the money than no money, right? And if it's going to serve someone, but that's not always the case. And I think for that, it wasn't the case, because they had to make a decision in 2 days whether they wanted to have the fund or completely scrap it. And ultimately, I think what we decided is to create a system where it's we need to get feedback from our community before we sign off on our end, because that means that we are always serving people. If it means we miss out on opportunities, that's fine. But it's hard it's hard when you're in it. But I know what you mean, because fundraising, there's always blocks, and it feels like, am I doing the right thing? Because you're sacrificing
for the funds.
It's integrity, but ultimately integrity and authenticity is what is going to remain. And I feel now I'm at the space. Before I was let's get the coin, let's do good things. I'm not all money is good money. I think my dad used to say that to me. Not all good money, and especially coming from a lot of basic poverty and having difficult upbringing and stuff. I just came to this space thinking, oh my god, money, it's all great, and just taking all these partnerships. And my dad sat me down and was no, you have to be careful, because you want to know, you want to stand for something. If you don't stand for anything, what you stand for, you can't just be taken. And sorry, I'm ranting, but I hope that kind of answers your question.
So wise decisions, wise and wisdom seems to be one of the issues, and there's an ecology. I mean, that experience at Glastonbury had its own ecology that was forming and rupturing and resolving, which is something to learn from that. And I love that. Not all money is good money. So Fran, not all policies are good policies.
No, exactly. And the thing for me is that our policies is very much driven by the people that we want to support.
Yes.
So, while I'm not there in the classroom day to day delivering to people, I want to make sure that everything that we do is relevant for those people that are. So we have a network of Musical Futures champion teachers, those people who, over a period of time, have found that working in ways which support the development of their young people to make music, whatever that music is, and I'm completely with Matt, it's not the genre, it's about making music ultimately. And that network really, they hold us to account. So if they perceive a problem or they've got something that they want to do with their students, they will feed back to us about what they would like us to do. Could we do this? Is there anything we could do with that? But increasingly what I've found is, is there anything that comes out good from a pandemic? I'm not sure, but certainly what the pandemic did for us is strengthen our network, and that collaboration between teachers who maybe have been working sort of independently and for many music teachers in a school, let's face it, they're working increasingly on their own as a single person department. They don't get the chance to sort of like develop ideas with other people. So how do they know what other practice looks like? So during the pandemic, I just sort of like thought, right, we need to connect everybody. We need to find out what everybody's doing. So I just put on a load of sort of like online sessions really, and it just said, who wants to come to this session? Who wants to share about what we're doing? So everybody put ideas about what we're doing. I stumped in a load of things that I thought might be useful. But it wasn't the what that we were doing. What it was building that network of support. So increasingly now, when we sort of like take any decisions about what we might focus our energy on, which ultimately has to be for young people in the classroom, we've got a really great network. So I get emails all the time from teachers who I wouldn't call formally on part of our network. They're not Musical Futures champion teachers as such, although we do have them, and their role is to advocate for taking that kind of approach where you put young people at the centre of music making in your classroom. But they've built up some kind of trust and relationship with them that they can email say like, Fran, we like this, or I've got your resources are great, or I've used this and I've done it I've used it in this way. It might also be useful for other teachers to know how I've been using it. So it's that dialogue and sort of like that opportunity to connect areas of practice and classrooms together and connect teachers so that they can understand what's happening elsewhere, which might be actually relevant in their context. Because if you're working on your own, how do you know what's happening elsewhere? You know, I was really fortunate that when I had my music education career in an inner city school in Leeds, I was one of 3 teachers, so I had we had lots of different sort of like areas of expertise to draw on. But when you're working on your own, you know, and let's face it, when you're working sort of like in school and you're teaching, you know, I remember Fridays when I had year 9 all day, you don't get time to eat, go to the toilet, don't mind think about what other people are doing in their classroom. So for me, it's about connecting practice and making sure that if other people are doing some great stuff, that our network gets to know about it and we share it and that we're responsive to it. So that's our policy making. You know, how do we connect good practice? How do we make sure that practice is reflecting the needs of young people? Because, yeah, we know that, as Matt says, you know, there are young people making music everywhere. And what obviously our experience is sort of like in a more formal context. But everybody gets to do, or most of the people get to do it in a school situation. You know, what is it that we can do to help teachers sort of like unpick that so that they can support their young people's music making journey in a way that their young people want to take.
Beautiful, thank you. I read recently a publication from the States called Surviving Classroom Music. I think they need access to your website and access to your community. You're speaking very much about, you know, it's not the genre, this is the mantra today, it's not the genre, it's the people. You know, it's people responsive, socially responsive, culturally responsive, community responsiveness. Thank you so much. Bridget.
I could further say it's not the policy, it's the people.
So
when someone says policy to me, I immediately think of government and I think of policy documents. So in music education terms, that's the model music curriculum, which was published a couple of years ago, the National Plan for Music Education, which was published in 2011, and the new National Plan, which was published last year, the National Plan for Music Education in Wales, and there was also a strategy policy document in Scotland for music education there. So I immediately think of that, and I think of what they said. And I also think about a comment that an Ofsted inspector, our Ofsted inspectors are inspectors of schools, His Majesty's Inspector for Music said once, you can't say, I do X, Y, or Z, whatever that course, set of course materials is. You need to understand it and reflect it in the classroom you're in, with the children young people you are working with. And I find that very interesting to think about, is that it's not the policy that's going to make the difference, it's the children young people and it's the people who are facilitating music education. But I would also say that I love the word community, and one of the things that I do hope is progress for us in policy is that progression is highlighted much more in the new national plan in England, and is a very strong thread through the Welsh national plan too. That we don't just talk about doing music, we talk about developing music, supporting young children to develop their music. And they've highlighted at last, and I think it's partly because of all the reports about how much the music industry is worth to this country, trying not to be cynical about it, but that they've talked about pathways to industry in the national plan. They've recognised that children and young people may want to move in a pathway towards the industry. But I also would champion a great quote that I got from a coordinator of music centres in the Czech Republic, who said, "We are delighted with our music centres and the children and young people who come through our centres. We're particularly proud of the fact that 98% of the children and young people who come through our music centres go on to have great amateur music careers, go on to love music, but not necessarily to have it as a career. We need to be supporting all children and people to develop their music skills wherever they want to go, and that concludes in a lifelong love of music, which will ensure that those who are in the career have the consumers of their music."
Yeah. And it's interesting you've introduced the political discourse, haven't you? Professional musicians versus amateur musicians versus what is it we're doing music education for. I think the book Policy and the Political Life of Music Education, which is edited by Patrick Schmidt and Richard Colwell, Policy and the Political Life of Music Education, might have a second edition which adds progression, because that's not a dirty word, is it? Progression, though it can be in some contexts. Thank you for that comment. And to end, please.
So I'm just trying to digest this a bit. So I think in terms of like policy, impact, that kind of thing, so internal, external. So internal from a youth music perspective, we've developed these kind of inclusive funding principles that we use internally. So it's kind of quite simple things like be trusting, keep it simple, act quickly, collaborate. And that's a kind of guiding force for us internally, which then helps us, like, when we're setting up policies and programs, we're doing that and building an evidence across the UK to help inform what we do. So we don't start with a draft and put it out there. We do this kind of relinquish, it's not even control, but open it up widely in terms of talking to young people, to organisations, to funders, to government, digesting all that information and drilling it down to our 3-year plan. And our 3-year plan then says it's these key objectives, it's got these key activities which we therefore can monitor. And what the amazing thing is, and we have this like portfolio of funded partners, currently 500 organisations, and they, with us, tell us how it's all going. And we've helped with a kind of quality framework, which most of the portfolio use, so we get consistency of approach, whilst allowing for bespoke local context, if you see what I mean. But the overarching parameters around social, musical and personal. And then you get a real sense of what's working, both in your organisation and what's working nationally. And is youth music working as well? Are we getting to the right places at the right time? Which makes you like increasingly reflective, which, you know, again, we're very sort of excited about youth music in terms of being able to do that. And that's been able to give us a longevity to support this grassroots infrastructure. I think the thing that we're finding like a massive challenge, and Jim and I touched on this just at the start outside, challenging times, we're only able to say yes to 23% of the applications we receive. So 77% are being turned down. And that's not because they're bad applications, but actually it's because there's this demand emerging, this increasing demand of this kind of work that's really, really, really powerful, and we've got to meet that demand as much as we can. Also, you know, these are often small, relatively small organisations and institutions, and they rely on pots of money to survive, and some of those pots of money are going, and that's either because a funder has lost money or because of a policy change. So our goal at the moment is quite a tough one, because it's almost like protecting an infrastructure which is reaching 85,000 young people, protecting but not losing sight of that thing I was talking about at the start, which is that change maker role, about reimagining increasingly what this could look like. The thing that probably won't surprise you is we're doing that impact measurement. We've attempted to make it simpler as well, because we were conscious that there was a lingo that maybe way back Youth Music had developed, with these long words that like nobody understood. And I think other organisations and institutions can come up with long words that nobody understands. Who does that not help? It doesn't help young people at all. It doesn't help leaders of small organisations like Jim, who are like working hard to keep the thing afloat. So the involvement of the community that we support in these decisions is really exciting, and that ties in with being an inclusive funder. So I hope that's making some kind of difference.
Thank you so much. We have to draw this to a close. I was going to say what next, but we can talk about that over coffee because it's 11 o'clock. It seems that, if you were doing a discourse analysis of this session, community really comes to the centre. Change making comes to the centre, and something about the political life of change makers needs to go independent, but to be interdependent. A creative ecology. Maybe that's what's starting here, and you could talk more about that, John, when you speak. Thank you so much, presenters and panelists, for a wonderful morning, and let's go and chew on the bone over a coffee. Thanks so much for your questions.